Hello everyone and welcome to the final DLC hitbox analysis video. It's been quite the journey, huh? The final character added to the game is none other than Sora, certainly a very requested character. While I don't have any attachment to the Kingdom Hearts series myself, he does feel like a worthy last fighter, and I know a lot of people are very happy about it. But as always, we're here to talk about hitboxes. So let's see if we can't find those famous DLC hitboxes one last time. The visuals, as always, were made by Zeckemyro, links to his Twitter in the description. In addition, if you want to support me, I do have a Patreon, where you mainly can vote on characters I should cover in upcoming hitbox videos, as well as some other perks. So should that be of interest to you, that's in the description as well. Anyways, let's get on with the show. Surprisingly enough, despite being the last DLC character, Sora actually does not have any unique DLC mechanics. Feels a bit anticlimactic to end it off with nothing after all the wildness we have looked at in the past. But in one sense, it's also kind of relaxing to not have to worry about understanding an entire character mechanic in just a few days to make this video. We can just have a look at the hitboxes and that is that. Though I guess we could take a brief look at Sora's hurt box before we begin. Luckily for Sora, they decided to be merciful and not put hurt boxes on his cartoonishly huge shoes. This effectively does give all his moves that use his feet a bit of disjoint, which we'll be having a look at later. Aside from that, the only thing to note is that the middle of his body sticks out a bit more than you would expect, but that's not too uncommon to be fair. Alright, starting off with what is actually a pretty unorthodox jab. Sora swings his keyblade down from over his head. The move has 3 hitboxes to start out with. On the first few frames, the 2 hitboxes farther away launch down, the closest one just stunning. After a few frames, another hitbox is added after where the blade was swung. Didn't take very long for Sora to show his DLC, huh? This hitbox also just stuns and trails after the blade. In addition, on this frame, the tipper hitbox angle is changed to drag inwards instead of down. All of this is of course just to set up into the second jab, which looks like this. It is a thrust and it has 6 hitboxes. Though since all of them are overlaid, it is effectively 3 hitboxes. If you are aerial, the hitboxes will launch you up, and should you be grounded, they will just stun you and slightly drag you inwards. Finally, the last hit is just a single hitbox that launches away. The first hit actually has a lot of active frames for a jab and is fairly quick. It reaches unusually high into the air, even to the point where you can anti-air with it. It's very good. At least the final DLC had a fun jab, though not quite as fun as Kazuya's. Sora's F-tilt actually has 2 variations to it. If you just do it normally, it's a 3-hit combo. The first hit is a swing in front of Sora, and in a way it's just kinda jab but in reverse. It even has the trailing hitbox that drags you in. The swing has a ton of active frames and covers a very nice amount of area in total, even still being active when the blade is over his head. Once again, the second hit is a thrust, and this time it's pretty clear that it's just jab 2 again, but a bit bigger. Much like jab 2, it just stunts you. The final hit is a launcher that sends you away, but I just have to note how excessive these hitboxes are. Already there are the 3 huge ones on his blade, but they also added a huge hitbox covering out in front of him. And even on top of that, they added the trailing hitbox just for good measure. I guess the lack of a character mechanic just means he has to be compensated elsewhere. The other variation is a single swing of the blade, that is performed by tapping the F-tilt. It is a bit stronger, and while the hitboxes are the same, the active frames are a bit different. And it does not reach quite as far behind Sora as the F-tilt combo, but it is barely noticeable. On the contrary, Downtilt is a very simple move, only consisting of 2 hitboxes, and the only difference between them is the angles they launch at, being slightly different farther out, as opposed to the one closer to Sora. The move also only has 2 active frames, which just looks a bit weird after jab and F-tilt had like 6 or something per move. The move is very good for combo starting though, so I guess that's probably the reason why they toned it down a bit. For up-tilt, we have a pretty standard overhead twirly move. On the first frame, Sora has a single hitbox serving as a scoop to hit opponents in front of him, launching them above him and into the remaining hits, which consists of 5 hitboxes attempting to stun you in place, all launching towards the center, after which Sora does a swing with the blade above him, launching into trapped opponents. The hitboxes are spaced out nicely and do cover a lot of area above him, so in addition to being that disjointed, it also makes for a great anti-air option. One kinda weird thing about this move though, is that for some reason on the second to last frame, the move shuffles all the hitbox IDs around for some reason, as you can see by the different colors. There's no real practical purpose to do this, and I have no idea why they did it. Maybe it's the unpaid intern getting one last laugh on the way out. It wouldn't be a Square Enix sword fighter without at least one sliding kick attack. This time it lives on in Sora's dash attack. The move has 3 hitboxes, all of which just launch up and away a bit. With this being Sora, as you might expect, the move has a ton of active frames. Starting out, the move is the strongest during the first few active frames, and at this point his leg is also partially intangible. After a bit, the hitboxes become a bit weaker, dealing less damage and knockback, although the intangibility is still there. During the latter part of the move, the hitboxes once again become weaker, but only by a tiny 0.4% damage, kinda making me wonder why they just didn't keep the prior damage for the final part, since 0.4% is really insignificant. During the last part, the intangibility does go away. However, a remarkable and quite unusual thing about this move is that when the move enters is its weakest state, they also added an additional hurt box beneath Sora, which is likely there because of how Sora's feet don't have hurt boxes, like I mentioned earlier, in combination with the fact that he slightly enters the Z-axis during the ending of the move. It's a very uncommon measure to add to a move, but I guess they must have found it that a lot of thinner hitboxes missed him when it just shouldn't, so they put an additional hitbox there to avoid Pikachu syndrome, I guess. Sora's grabs are fairly standard, if not a little underwhelming. His standing grab is not the best, sharing the same amount of range with Pikachu for perspective. His dash grab and pivot grab are a bit better, but again, that is to be expected. At least he does get some combo throws and even some kill throws if you can land them, so even if the grabs themselves are not the best, there are at least some rewards tied up in them. Now it's time to fly on over and take a look at his aerials, starting with neutral air. Now Sora's aerials work a little bit like Bayonetta's aerials, as in some of them have several different parts in which you can input as you please. This is present on both his forward air and his neutral air, and they do largely share the same hitboxes across the two variations, the only difference being the first hit of each combo being a unique move. So I'll just talk about both here, beginning with neutral air, where Sora does a somersault in the air. Here the Keyblade is granted 3 hitboxes, which stick to it as Sora spins around. Since the point of the move is to combo into another hit afterwards, the move has a ton of differing angles depending on where you hit the move. For the most part it seems consistent, but as with any multi-segmented attack like this, there are bound to be some inconsistencies. Forward air is a clean slash in front of Sora, being kinda reminiscent of Shulk's forward air, though obviously not quite as good, but I mean, hey, what is. It has a nice amount of active frames, and just like Nair, attempts to set up into the 2 other aerial combo hits. Should you keep pressing the attack button after either of these attacks, you will go into the aerial attack combo. As far as the hitboxes go, the aerial you start with does not really matter. The hitboxes are identical across both combo starters. However, the angles and damage are a bit different for what that's worth. The second attack consists of 5 hitboxes. The blade has 3 of them launching at different angles throughout the move. Also in front of Sora there are 2 other hitboxes which are just there to make sure the move connects better, I suppose. They just launch up and naturally attempt to set up into the launcher coming after. The final hit is simply 3 hitboxes that launch away, and once again only the angles are different between the 2 variations. Both moves are really solid. The hitboxes are good, and being able to continuously hit aerials like this is no joke. Moving on to a not so complicated move, compared to everything else so far, back air is a nice change of pace, being just a simple big hitbox back air. It does hit a little bit lower than most other back airs, likely to compensate for how floaty Sora's jumps are, making it a bit easier to hit for him. I don't really have too much to say about it, it's quite strong and does launch at a good angle, and I mean that's pretty much what you want out of a back air most of the time anyways. So no complaints from me. Where you might see some complaints, however, is with up air, because oh my, that is an up air worthy of the series is based on. Well, partially based on anyways. On the first 2 frames of the move, it has 5 hitboxes, naturally enough covering the blade, but also a huge area in front of Sora as well, which is just so DLC that it's not even funny. After this, 4 of the hitboxes keep going in a standard sortie up air arc, but of course not without its trusty trailing safety net hitbox. Just for good measure. It's a very good move if you couldn't tell, even if it was just not for the hitbox. It's also just a pretty powerful move damage and kill power wise. I'm glad we got to see at least one last stupid DLC up air on the way out. Wouldn't want it any other way. For the final aerial, we have down air, and you can at least not fault it for not being unique. Sora spins around while he's diving towards the ground. On the way down, he is covered in 4 hitboxes that rotate along with the blade. They all have the same damage and knockback, and actually retain it for the entire duration of the move, meaning it has no sour spots to speak of. Needless to say, the amount of distance you can cover with this move is massive. It can certainly catch an offstage opponent off guard, or more likely an on-guard offstage opponent that simply has no other option but to eat it. The hitboxes just launch away, not much more to it. But since Sora is DLC, it also has a landing hitbox, which looks like this. It covers the ground in both directions pretty generously, though not so much into the air. But to be fair, you just came from there, and cover that area so it might not be as necessary. Up air is aerial sweep, and consists of Sora doing many spins as he sends it to the air, kinda similar to the Link's up Bs. On the first frame of the move, it has 2 hitboxes that launch up. After this, however, 4 more are added, that all deal the same damage and will launch with minor angle differences, with the intent of keeping you within the hits coming after it. The move then continues to use this arrangement of hitboxes, alternating behind him and in front of him, though the sizes of the hitboxes vary. At the end, there is a quite respectable launcher hit, being 5 huge hitboxes launching away. Sonic Blade is Sora's side B. Sora does up to 3 dashes in any direction. Additionally, if you hold the button down, you can home onto opponents. Ah, great, just what I needed. More obnoxious homing attacks. Can't be a coincidence that they named it Sonic Blade. Despite it being a pretty complicated move in terms of gameplay, the actual hitboxes are very simple. Just 3 hitboxes over the blade, the pretty usual arrangement. It is actually slightly offset towards Sora, and does not cover the entire blade. The hitboxes are the same for each dash, though the angles are slightly different. However, I don't imagine it mattering too much, since the move is homing and all. It's a great recovery option, and I'm sure with the homing it can at least catch some people off guard from time to time. Down B is a counter. Who on earth could have seen that coming? The detection hitbox looks like this. nothing too unusual. It's placed a bit more in front of Sora than most other counters, kinda like the other one-directional ones. However, unlike those counters, Sora's counter does not actually have the directional facing restriction that counters like K. Rool and Sephiroth have, meaning you can actually hit counters from behind if they overshoot Sora and hit the detection hitbox. The actual triggered attack hitbox looks like this. It's, you know, massive, but that is nothing unusual for counterattacks. You can also counter projectiles, however the reflection is kinda weird. Instead of reflecting the projectile and sending it back, it makes it yours and just lets it keep going. So it could technically hit another opponent afterwards, though that is really not going to be too easy to apply in a 1v1 match, making the whole thing kinda pointless. But it's there if you want to. Aside from that, I don't have too much to say about it. I mean, it's another counter. It does counter things. Nice to have, but usually not something that defines a character. Sora's neutral B actually has 3 different variations, that being Ferraga, Thundaga, and Blizzaga. They cycle through after being used, meaning you have to use the other 2 at some point before you can use the one you just used. Ferraga looks like this. On the first frame, it actually has a hitbox on the blade before the projectile is even fired. After that, the projectile is just a single hitbox traveling forwards, being pretty much what you would imagine it being. Now, as for the 2 others, at the time of this recording, we are currently missing some data, meaning we can't actually make visuals for these moves. However, the hitboxes still show up in mods, so we'll just be using footage from Blue Jay's hitbox mod, the footage courtesy of Jay. Thundaga consists of 3 bolts of lightning striking down. Each bolt is the same and the hitbox simply covers the lightning as it travels down. There's also an aerial version of the move, though the hitboxes are the same, only the position of the bolts are different. Lastly, Blizzaga is a burst of ice projectiles. The ice spikes out in different directions, and should you get hit, they will actually freeze you. The move is also deceptively disjointed, going a bit farther than the particle effects would lead you to believe. And lastly, the final big 3, up, down, and F smash. Sora thrusts his keyblade into the air, releasing a spark of light. On the first frame, there is a little scoop hitbox in front of Sora, which I think we all know what that means at this point. The actual hitbox on the key is massive. The red hitbox in the center is the strongest, dealing a little bit more knockback, while the remaining 3 hitboxes deal the same damage and knockback. And to say that this move is hard to challenge is a bit of an understatement. It's a very good up smash, not much to complain about honestly. Once again, we're faced with the absurd amount of active frames that Sora just seems to bring everywhere. F smash has 6 hitboxes, 3 on his blade and 3, you know, just out in front of him. The move is the strongest on the first 2 frames of the move. After this, the move lingers for a surprisingly long amount of time. Even after the blade is well behind Sora, the hitboxes are still there. Granted, they are weaker, but I mean, come on, just look at this. And I mean, the size of the hitboxes is nothing to scoff at either. It's a good F smash, no doubt. And finally, for the final move of the final DLC character, we have honestly kinda saved the best for last. Down smash has Sora leaping into the air and thrusting the keyblade into the ground. The hitboxes look like this, and I honestly just kind of love how unique this move is. I can't say I've ever seen anything quite like it. The outer hitbox is the weaker one, while the closer ones are the sweet spots. The move even sticks a little bit into the ground, which I am sure will make it able to hit people, recovering a lot more than most other moves. Now, if those weird shapes of the hitboxes were not enough, it seems that Sora had a little talk with Kazuya before arriving in Smash, because for no good reason whatsoever, on the first few frames of Down Smash, his entire body is intangible, and a few frames later, he's intangible from his waist down. It just feels so unnecessary, but to be honest, I can't really be too mad after what Kazuya got away with. However, with that, we have looked at every DLC character in Smash Ultimate. It's been a long and interesting ride, but this is the end. When I first made the video on Joker all the way back, I didn't really think I would still be doing this when all the DLC was said and done, but here we are. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm honestly kinda sad to see it come to an end, though we still have plenty of other characters to talk about, and I'm not going anywhere anytime soon. Maybe one day I might actually be able to cover every character in Ultimate, and I hope you'll be along for that, no matter how long it might take. So, as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.